Our two passages of Scripture are Luke chapter 4, verse 16, and Ezekiel 20, verse 12. So a brief recap of where we've gotten so far. We're talking this year about the idea of Sabbath for the month of January, and we'll probably go into the first week of February next week and just do a kind of recap message next week. But we're talking about what does it mean to be a person who genuinely experience God's plan for Sabbath. And so we've been moving a little bit away from the kind of theoretical and philosophical and theological into, well, what do we need to do? What does it actually look like? And we understand that Sabbath is not just about taking a break. It's definitely not about doing whatever it is that I want to do. It's not my video game day. It's not my day to watch football all day. It's not my day to binge watch that show all day. It is our opportunity to receive a gift from God. Remember, we've talked about how Sabbath is not something that we do or that we make. It's not about, God, look how good a Sabbath I did. It's about God wants to give to you, and the New Testament uses the language of God giving us Sabbath. God wants to give you the gift of a day of rest and rejuvenation in order to prepare you for the week ahead and recover from the week that you've had. It doesn't always look the same. We talked a couple weeks ago about how God needs to be the Lord of your Sabbath and what that looks like, that God knows what you need for the coming week, and He then needs to be Lord of your Sabbath, because I don't know. Let me give you an example of this. Last Sunday, I got a lot of sermon examples, which was wonderful. You're welcome. So last Sunday, as you know, we had this massive snowstorm. So I woke up, I already had my sermon already, and I said, you know what? My sermon this week had a lot of discussion points and a lot of take home and think about it points. So this would be a great message to preach online. And so I made that decision to do that. So I got on and preached my message at about 11 o'clock. And then we, carried on with the rest of our Sabbath. Now, as you know, we got about 1.5 to 2 feet of snow last week. And so that needed to be dealt with. And while we try to rest on the Sabbath, we also recognize, and Jesus recognized, that sometimes there are things that we need to do. And so I couldn't just leave 2 feet of snow in the driveway because, hey, you live in Vermont, if you let it get ahead of you, then it's way more work later. It's definitely not going to save me any work if our cars get stuck in the driveway trying to get out. That's not going to make my life easier or less stressful. So, hey, I needed to do some snow removal to stay ahead of it. Now, of course, the question is, especially if you're a little bit of a perfectionist like I am, well, how much do you need to do? And so I recognized there was no doubt in my mind, hey, I need to get outside and do some plowing to keep the driveway more or less clear. So, tons of people use the church as a pull-off, as a turnaround. People meet here to exchange children all the time, that sort of thing. So, hey, I need to do some snow removal. But how much do I need to do? God answered that question about the third time I got the plow truck stuck and couldn't get it out and then snapped my tow cable in half. I said, okay, that's enough plowing. That was the line that I just crossed when I went down the hill and buried the truck in the snowbank, and it was on ice, and I had to back up a hill, and my tow strap snapped. I said, I think the driveway's clean enough now. That was God being Lord of my Sabbath and saying, you know what? You're done. Go back inside. This is the first example of last week. Second example is this. I've got a snowmobile in my garage. My daughter, Haley, really loves the snowmobile. She goes over to Kimball's house and does all kinds of crazy things on a snowmobile that I cannot say anything negative about, and I cannot judge her for, because I have done much, much crazier. Haley, no, you're not allowed to talk to my dad about that and get him to tell you stories about things that I've done on a snowmobile. So my snowmobile is, it's from when I was younger, and it just needed a little bit of work to get running. So I said, hey, I'm going to try and get that running before we get any farther into the year so that Haley can possibly, if she does all of her chores and is responsible, maybe drive it a little bit. And so I said, you know what? I really love working on snowmobiles. I bought my first sled when I was 9. It's something I've always done. It's fun. It's relaxing for me, usually to a certain point. So I'm going to go try and just spend a few minutes on that, try and get it running so that Haley can have that. And I felt that was an okay thing to do on Sabbath, and I wasn't putting a burden in it. It didn't have to get done. It wasn't stressful. And so I went out and I was working on it. I spent about 20, 25 minutes on it, and it wasn't starting. And all of a sudden I went to pull it, and the pull cord snapped. And I looked down, and I was like, oh. But when it snapped, it didn't go all the way in. It snapped right at the end, and I can still see the rope kind of poking out of the engine there, so you can pull the rope out, retie it onto the handle, and keep pulling. So I reached down, and I grabbed the rope, and I was going to pull it back out so I could tie it back onto the handle, and it slipped out of my gloves and went into the thing. And I was like, all right, I get it. Don't need to fix the snowmobile today. It can stay. It doesn't need to be running. I get it. Okay, you don't have to burn my garage down. I'm going inside. Okay, I'm gonna go sit on the couch and put my sweatpants on. I'm done. So here's what's interesting. Haley ended up going to the Kimballs that night. She spent the night at their house, and so my. Can I finish my story? Because that's exactly what I was about to say. So Haley went to their house, and I was thinking, if I can get it running this afternoon, then when she comes home tomorrow, she can ride a little bit at our house. So Haley went to the Kimballs that night, and about midnight, I'm about to fall asleep, and all of a sudden, I'm getting a messenger call on my phone, and it's Haley who just threw up at the Kimballs' house and needs me to come pick her up. And after I drove to Hardwick and picked her up and collapsed in the bed and slept in the next morning, it dawned on me that that's exactly what I've been talking about. You see, I had it in my mind, hey, wouldn't it be great to get the snowmobile running for Haley tomorrow? And had it been up to me, I would have spent hours on it, and I would have taken the thing apart, and I would have I've got a whole roll of pull cord, I had all the stuff to fix it, and I could have done all that, I could have wasted my entire Sabbath on it, and then she gets the flu, comes home, and she's in bed all day Monday. But he knew that was going to happen. He knew that there was no reason I needed to have it running for the next day. And that's why, as Lord of my Sabbath, he said, yeah, that's enough for the day. You did some work on it. You figured out what else you need to do. It's time to go inside. And then I didn't try to do anything else the rest of the day. I just sat on the couch where it was safe and nothing could break.
That's not true. Yeah, that's not true. You guys tried going on a date.
Oh, yeah. Then we tried going on a date. And then I got a fire call, which turned out to be nothing. And then we went home. And then Emma threw up on the couch. So yes, I did. But that one was Rachel's idea. So I was just listening to my wife. So that's where we've been. Luke chapter 4, verse 16 reads like this. We looked at this last week, so we're just going to look at it briefly. And he came to Nazareth, being Jesus, where he had been brought up. And as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. Last week's message in 2 sentences, it was normal for Jewish men to go into the synagogue and read. Jesus wasn't taking over the service. What's significant is the word custom. If you break that word down, it means something that is so usual that it's basically a law, right? That it is just, this is your custom, this person does it. This is the habit that you have that if you break it, it's just mind-blowing to people. It's so set in your life that it might as well be written in stone. That's what Sabbath was for Jesus. And basically, as Christians, if we're going to say, I'm in relationship with Jesus, you can't be in a relationship with someone that you're different from, right? Have you ever tried to be friends with someone, you say, oh, man, I love basketball, and they say, oh, man, sports are so stupid. And he's like, all right, and you say, well, I really love hunting. And they say, oh, well, I just got back from my PETA meeting. And you're like, all right, next subject. Oh, you know what I really love? I really love some good barbecue wings. And I say, well, actually, I'm a vegetarian. And you go on down the line, and eventually you're like, maybe we just shouldn't be friends. Not because we think we're bad people or anything, but just what are we going to talk about? It's hard to be in a relationship with people that you're completely different from. And so if we're going to talk about I'm in a relationship with Jesus, then we need to live lives that look like his. And if a part of his life was that he just every week to the point where it was law in his life that he observed Sabbath, then we need to do the same. Very simple question, does that happen in your life? Or is Sabbath kind of this thing that you do when you get around to it? All right? Now, moving on from there, I think that we all would say that we like the idea of a Sabbath, right? Everybody likes the idea, hey, you're going to have one day a week where you don't have to do anything. It's a day to relax. It's a day to recharge yourself. It's a day to take a break. It's a day when everything's already done before you get to it and there's nothing to worry about. I mean, nobody's going to argue with that. Nobody's going to say, oh, the burdens of religion. You know, like that's a great thing. We all want that. But for many of us, it just doesn't happen. In fact, for most of us, it just doesn't happen, especially if you weren't raised in a home that observes Sabbath. If you were raised in a home that Saturday and Sunday were the same, if you were raised in a non-religious home, it's a really difficult practice. It is a complete, you have Monday to Friday weekend for 20 years. as a kid. You go to school Monday to Friday, and then you have the weekend when you don't go to school, and Saturday and Sunday are identical. It's a hard practice to put together. But we all would say, I think, that we want it. I don't think any of us would just reject the idea altogether. But then the question is, well, how do we make that happen? So here's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you two things. The first one is just another reason, another step further of why it's important. Just in case you're not convinced yet that Sabbath is important, not just like I should probably do that, like I should probably eat more vegetables, but this is something that you have to do, okay? This isn't, well, you should probably eat more vegetables. This is, you have to eat, okay? This isn't your doctor saying, well, your cholesterol is a little bit high, so maybe try altering your diet. This is the person that's in the hospital because they're dehydrated, and the doctor says, you have to eat and drink, all right? That's what we're talking about. Not like, well, this is kind of a nice thing. You must do this, all right? And this is one of the things I think we've gotten wrong in the church is that we don't emphasize the Sabbath as much as Jesus and as much as the Father did, as much as it's emphasized in the text. Like, this is a necessary thing. Not if you're going to be a Christian, not like, well, so you're saying I'm not a Christian if I don't keep Sabbath. No, if you're going to live the life that God has for you, if you're going to live in victory, if you're going to live in his kingdom, if you're going to have everything he wants you to have, you have to do this. There's no way to get God's plan for your life in your life without Sabbath. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is look at one more reason why that's true, and then we're going to talk a little practically about how to make that happen. So if you flip over to Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 12. Now, this is a really interesting passage. I would love to do a full expository sermon and really get into this. We're not going to do it today, but just look at this one verse. Look at what God says. He's talking about Israel. He's talking about when they've kind of fallen away and they come back, and he says this. He says, moreover, I gave them my Sabbaths as a sign between me and them, that they might know that I am the Lord who sanctifies them. All right? So here God gives us yet another reason why Sabbath is important. Not just to rest, not just to take a break, but what he says is, I gave you Sabbath so that you can be reminded that it is me who sanctifies you. The word sanctify means, bring it up, Matt. Sanctify means to make holy. Another way to say sanctify or holy is it literally means in the Old Testament set apart. And so the best example is all of the utensils that they used in worship. They were holy. It didn't mean they were better. It didn't mean that they were necessarily of better quality. It was that they only were used for worship. That the plates that they used for sacrifices, they didn't take them home afterwards and use them at home. When they had potlucks, if they had potlucks, they didn't take them out to serve. They were exclusively used for worship. All right? Basketball players, good example. Let's see. Who of you, how many basketball players do we have here today? Four, five, maybe some more. Those of you who know each other, who is the most particular about their shoes? Is there a shoe guy in the group? My guess would be Jaden or Elliot. If I had to guess, right? Now, I've been on basketball teams where there's a shoe guy, and he's like mapping out the models for the year and reading articles about what he's going to buy. But I bet none of you, how many of you basketball players wore your basketball shoes to church this morning? Anybody? How many of you have ever walked outside in your basketball shoes? Okay. You people are not the shoe guys. All right, when I was in high school and I bought a pair of basketball shoes, they did not ever touch the outside until they were retired from use, right? Because you go outside once and you can get rocks in them, you can scuff up the bottom. I mean, they were only used between the locker room and on the wooden court. That's it. They were set aside for that purpose. Now, that's the idea of holy. I'm not saying your basketball shoes are holy, all right? I'm saying that what that is, the way that I would use basketball shoes, the way I would set them apart for use only in this arena, all right? And this is a lesson we're trying to teach our children, is certain shoes shouldn't be used for certain things. I'm really bad about this now with clothes. I will use jeans out in the garage, and jeans become work jeans very quickly. But that's what holy is set apart. You don't use them for other things. And for you to be holy, that means you are used for God, not for anything else. That you are used for good, not for evil. That's the idea. And so this is God saying, Sabbath, one of the reasons you have it is to remind you that it's me that makes you holy. That it's me that makes you set apart. It's me that makes you useful for the building of my kingdom. And so I got to thinking about that idea this week, and what does that mean? And I thought about the way we structure our lives. And one of the important things about church is this. And so this is specifically not only having Sabbath, but this is why church needs to be an important part of your Sabbath. This is one of the reasons, and this idea is why I moved my Sabbath to Sunday, because it wasn't just about, I need a day where I don't have responsibilities, because I wanted church to be a part of my Sabbath, and here's why. When you come to church, it is a reminder of what your household is meant to look like, all right? And here's what I mean by that. When we talk about house, right, that can mean a building. I'm going to so-and-so's house after church today, right? It's a building, it's a place. When you look historically, when you look biblically, house was often used to refer to a family, right? Or a kingdom, or something like that. That it wasn't just about a building, it was about this area or these sets of circumstances or these people that were overseen by a person, right? And so you would say like the house of Kish, for example. And when you say it like that, you don't think of, well, this house here or the log home in Hardwick. You think of, well, that the family that is defined by that last name. And so when we think about house like that, what God says is he wants to be Lord of our houses. And that means that in my home, in the place that I live with my family, that I am not the supreme authority. That God is, that I am not the king of my household, I am the steward, right? Or all my Lord of the Rings fans, right? There's a difference between a steward and a king. Who's higher? The king. The steward only rules with the authority granted to him by the king. It is not his inherently. A king is a king by blood. They inherited the right to rule. A steward doesn't have a right to rule. They're granted that authority by the one who does. I am a steward of my house. I am not the king. I am not the king of my wife. I am not the king of my children. I am a steward. I have a stewardship of them, and I answer to the king who is rightfully enthroned above me, right? You understand that and how that works? Here's the problem. Sometimes we forget. Sometimes we like to dig our thrones out of the closet. Typically, when we start to get insecure, when things start not going well in our families, and we feel like we're not doing well enough, we need to assert ourselves as the dominant one in the house. Now, here's the thing. I can go back to that building, and we don't own our home right now. We will eventually own a home. Many of you do own homes. But we still say this thing, right? When our kids argue with us, it's my house, I make the rules, right? And that's true, and you can say that. But sometimes we take that a little bit too far, right? And that's when we start digging out the throne and saying, this is my house, I am the king. We lose the attitude of stewardship, we take on the attitude of kingship. And so one of the important things about coming to church is that we walk into a building and we say, you know what, this isn't my house. Because often what we say when we say this is my house, we mean this is my building. And you could even say that, hey, God gave us everything we have, and that's true, but you know what? Legally, your name is on the deed, all right? If you go and they do a title search on your house, your name is on it. You own the building. This is my building. Okay. This is not your building. There is not a person alive who owns this building. The church owns this building as an organization, and as an organization that is very, very clear about the fact that we serve and are led by God. God owns this building. On paper. And so when you come to church on Sunday morning, it's just like sometimes you need to look at your kids and say, this is my house, you're going to do what I say. We sometimes need that attitude adjustment here, that we walk in, and there's no mistaking whose house this is, right? There's no mistaking whose house this is. There's Bibles on the seats. There's a cross on the wall. I mean, we know, you know when you walk in this building, and you walk in here and you're reminded, this is what it feels like to be in a house that is under the lordship of Jesus Christ. And so even if you've dug the throne out, even if you started to take over your house, you come here on Sunday and there's nothing you can do but sit and be reminded that he is Lord and you are steward. And it is that opportunity on Sunday to realize, I don't enable my family. I've got great kids. It's not just because of me. And you can go to the school every day, and your teachers come up. People said this to my parents about me all the time. You go to school, and teachers say, man, your kids are just so great, and they're so well-behaved, and they're so wonderful. And you can go in and say, yeah, I'm a pretty darn good parent, right? And then we come to church on Sunday, and God reminds us, no. I mean, you are a good parent, but it's me that enables you to do that. It's me that enables you to be the parent that you are, so don't get too full of yourselves. Because you get full of yourselves, you dig out your throne, you try to make yourself king, and all of your sustenance goes away. He says, get to church on Sunday so I can remind you where your goodness and your holiness comes from. Every week, give yourself a reminder, this is what a house that is lorded by God looks like. I've needed reminders like this. There are times when I have allowed the atmosphere of my home to move away from what it's meant to be. Things like playing the wrong type of music in my home that greatly affected the spiritual atmosphere of our house. And coming to church and saying, this is what it's like to be in an atmosphere that is defined by worship and by giving authority to the king. My house needs to feel like this. That's what he's talking about. And so coming to church on Sunday, hey, this isn't a rule, all right? This isn't, you better do it or else you're not keeping Sabbath. This is, in order for Sabbath to function, in order for you to be reminded that God is Lord of your life, you need to be humble enough to submit to, I don't need that time. I've got nothing to do today. So what's 2 hours out of my schedule? Sit here, not get up halfway through my sermon and leave because you don't like what I'm saying, and allow God to speak to you and say, this is what it's like when I am Lord of your life. And sometimes that's hard to do. So we're going to talk today about rules. What?
That was a really long intro.
That was the first point. I said there's 2 points today. And the second one will be short. It's a simple point.
Honey, don't say that. Every time you say that, it's twice as long.
But it makes you feel better.
No.
So we're going to talk, so we say, all right, so we get it, so it's important. So we get that, if we just don't pay attention to it at all, Sabbath doesn't happen. If you haven't figured that out, if you are not so intentional about Sabbath, it will not happen. You've got to make this happen in your life, all right? That's just the way it is. You cannot just fall into Sabbath, because guess what? There's nothing happening after Saturday. Your to-do list doesn't have to get done on Saturday because your kids aren't going to school on Sunday. Your kids' homework doesn't have to be done. If you get weekends off, you don't have to go to work. You can put stuff off, and you will. Sabbath has to happen intentionally, which is where the rules come from. But then we say, well, it's not about rules. It's not about we have to do this. It's not about creating Sabbath. So how do we have rules but not be creating Sabbath? How do we receive Sabbath as a gift and be able to do that without having rule, and we get really caught up in that. And so here's what it boils down to. I'm going to give you a couple examples. It's a very simple principle. Hopefully you all grabbed a bulletin on your way in. If not, grab it on the way out. There's only one fill-in this week. It's this one phrase I'm going to say in just a couple minutes. And if you can grasp this phrase, it'll transform the way that you view Sabbath. All right? On stage with me here, I've got 2 items. I have an axe, okay, and I have an other kind of axe, just what some people refer to a guitar as, all right? Now, this is an antique axe that I dug out of the ground in my backyard last night. It wasn't like 3 feet down. It was just sitting on the ground. I knew where it was. And I heat-treated this, and I ground it down. I put a new handle on it. This is American hickory, if anybody's interested. Yeah, it's good stuff. It's a fine American wood. Put some new lacquer on it. I buffed it out so it looked real shiny up on stage. Axe, right? Everybody know it's an axe. All right, we're good on that. This is another kind of axe. Now, this is a electric guitar. This was handmade by a guy named Gene Liberty out in Illinois. The wood here, we have quilted maple. The red is an amaranth inlay. It's got a flamed maple neck through body. If you're a guitarist, you think that's really cool. Everybody else doesn't care. I love this guitar. I was able to buy it from the guy who made it by hand. Plays really nice. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful instrument. I think this is also American-made or American wood out of Oregon. Another kind of axe, right? Now, let's say I have this You guys are learning lots about wood species today. We have this yellow birch, all right? This is from my wood pile in the basement. Now, let's say I need to chop that piece of birch in half, all right? It's too big. It's not going to fit in my wood stove, or I need to use it for something else. Now, am I going to pick this up, right, and just swing it as hard as I can? Not before you're sharp. That's a good point. That's a dull guitar. What are you doing? Now, am I going to swing this guitar as hard as I possibly can into this piece of wood? No. That would be a very, very, very costly 20 seconds. I'm not going to do that. Do you think I would ever do that under any circumstance? If someone came to my house and said, can I grab your guitar and smash it into this tree as hard as I can? Do you think I would say yes or no? Probably no. Probably every time, right? Yeah? That I am awfully legalistic.
I don't know what that means.
Legalistic means I just only care about the rules, and everything's got to be by the rules, and it's got to be this way, and you can never deviate, and it's just, I'm always forcing people to do things my way against their will, right? I must be awfully legalistic, right? How many people would say that?
Only about the dishes.
We're not talking about dishes, but we'll come back to that. I think I just filled in my second blank on my, what rules do you wish people followed? Don't put my non-stick pans in the dishwasher, Dakota. Now, if I need to chop this piece of wood in half, I'm going to grab this axe, right? Now, if you came to my house and said, Eddie, can I grab that hickory-handled axe, the nice shiny one out of your basement, and can I swing this into a tree as hard as I possibly can? What would I say? I'd probably say, yeah, you can do that for most of you, right? Maybe for like a 6-year-old, maybe not, but yeah, that's fine. Like that's what this is made for. It. You can go and swing this into a tree as hard as you possibly can. Likewise, if you asked me if you could plug this into an electronic device into the wall, I'd probably say that's a bad idea because it's metal and you're gonna electrocute yourself. Now, hey, I think you get the point, right? I'm not legalistic. The reason I won't let you smash my guitar into a piece of wood is that's not what it's made for, and that will destroy it. That will break it. And so as I thought about rules this week, I came to realize that a proper rule, a good rule, because there's good rules and bad rules, but a rule in the truest sense of the word, they're always there to protect. That's what rules do. That we have this in our heads as we come to the idea of religion and all of the negative connotations that we've developed, especially in our country, and many for good reason. We have this idea that rules are always bad, and they're always just God forcing us to do things His way. And hey, none of us like to be forced to do things somebody else's way when it's not our way. And we kind of apply that to God's rules. And we've talked about this before, but just to say it just in plain English, rules are there to protect. And so that's why we're going to do this little exercise today. We probably won't get through all these. Half of these are probably just going to be for me to chuckle about later. Whoops. I'm not going to tell you who's reading and not reading. What's an example of a rule that once you thought was unfair? Bedtime. Bedtime is a rule that, and I think most of us would agree with that, especially after you have kids and you just need them to go to sleep. Why do you make your kids go to sleep, right? Because you need a break. What's the other reason you have your kids go to sleep? You have your kids go to... See, I know what happens to my kids when they don't go to sleep. They're miserable, especially maybe just the little ones, maybe all of them. They start falling over, but Haley does that too when she gets tired. If Haley has school the next day and she's up too late, she's miserable at school, she can't pay attention, she's not focused, right? We have our kids go to bed on time for their protection, all right? Let's see, what's another one? Being slow to speak and quick to listen is a rule that people wish others followed more closely, right? When you are not slow to speak, what happens? You usually get yourself into trouble. And so if you follow that rule, chewing with your mouth closed, that's the one that I wish more people followed. Yeah, I think that we would all agree. Here's a good one. What is a rule that you don't understand or think is wrong and unfair? Segregation. I think that's a good rule that is unfair because that doesn't actually protect people, right? It maybe protects the ideologies of some people, but that hurts people, that degrades people. That is not a proper rule. It does not protect. What's an example of a rule that you once thought was unfair? Don't walk on the railroad tracks. Fair. An example of a rule that once you thought was unfair, but now appreciate: locking the doors at school. You used to be able to just walk in any door of the elementary school you wanted. You have to walk around the building when you couldn't find a parking space. Why can't times be like that anymore? All right, I'm going to do one more. Let's see. Somebody with good handwriting. Lots of going to bed early. Actually, just talked about that one. Here's a good one. Phone limits. I'm going to say phone and internet. Let's say anything kind of limits. One that I used to think was bad, now I understand. Limiting phones. One of the hardest things about growing up is you think that the situation that you are currently in is everything in the world. You haven't yet developed an understanding of what perspective is. And so as you grow older, you learn that, hey, sometimes you just need to get out of a situation to understand it more fully. And so here's what we're looking at. Rules are there to protect, less than they're there to create. That rules are all about, here exists, right, the way things should be, and rules make sure it stays that way. I tell my kids, you can't run and play in the street, because currently my kids are alive, and I would like them to stay that way, right? So them following the rule doesn't make them good kids, it allows them to continue being good kids. And so here's the role that rules play in Sabbath. Write this down, all right? And this is where we have gotten so wrong. This sums up the last 2 years of sermons. So if your neighbor's asleep, and has been for 2 years, just wake them up now and look at it all right? Rules don't create Sabbath, they protect it. Rules don't create Sabbath, they protect Sabbath. Now here's what that means. That Sabbath isn't about, here's the list of things that you can't do, and if you don't do these things, if you don't walk too far, if you don't bake too much food, if you don't do these things, if you don't break a sweat, then you will have done the Sabbath, right? That's not it. Our rules, no number of rules, can create Sabbath. It's not about, God, look, I followed all the rules, I did it just right, and here it is, and I put together, and I put it in the oven for 350 for 4 hours, and out came a Sabbath cake, right? That's not what it's about. It's not about creating. It's about receiving a gift. But in order to receive the gift, we have to be open, we have to be available, we need to create space for it. And so here's what this looks like in my life. My Saturday is full of rules. I am just continually adding rules to my Saturday. But Saturday, I'm not trying to create a Sabbath, I'm trying to protect my Sunday. And so one of my rules on Saturday is any project that doesn't absolutely have to get done, right, which I have to really sit and think about, because to me, every project really needs to get done. Everything that doesn't absolutely have to get done doesn't happen until my sermon is written. And sometimes it's like, well, it's 80%, and I've just got some examples I want to kind of think about in my head, and I'll think about those while I'm working. But my sermon is written. New rule, the bulletin is printed and in my bag, along with anything else I need for Sunday morning, before I go do anything else. So that I can wake up Sunday morning, have breakfast with my kids, grab my bag, and go to church. I don't have to print, I don't have to get on the computer, I don't have to do anything. That's a rule. I don't do any project until my sermon is written. It's a rule I made for myself. God told me to, and I just do it by myself. But that's a rule. My preparation day is full of rules. My Sabbath isn't. My goal is to get to the point where on my Sabbath, I don't need rules. I don't need to say, you're not allowed to clean up the basement, because my basement's already clean. I don't need to say, well, you're not allowed to print out bulletins, because I don't need a rule that tells me not to print out bulletins if they're already printed. And you know what? If there's a typo, I'm just not going to do it. Not because it's a rule, but because I prepared as best as I could. And so I don't need a rule about printing bulletins, because the rule is on Saturday. So then my Sabbath is not dominated by rules. I'm just not tempted to do those things because they're already done. And so when we begin to make that switch of, I put rules in my life not because it makes the Sabbath, but because it enables it to happen, that is how we get into the character and into the mindset that God wants us to be in. Because here's why. If you're trying to create Sabbath, you might say, one of my rules is I will not cook on Sabbath, right? Now, we're not cooking today. Last night, we got out a roast. We put it in the crock pot. We put some seasoning. We tossed it in the fridge. This morning, we woke up, plugged it in, and we're done, all right? So we're not cooking today. That's just what God called us to do. That's one thing that we did to help enable our Sabbath, right? But you could be tempted to say, I am not going to cook on Sabbath. That is my rule. But think about this scenario. Maybe God says, here's your rule. You cook for Sunday on Saturday. So your rule isn't that you don't cook on Sunday. Your rule is that you don't cook on Saturday because maybe on Sunday God wants you to cook your neighbor dinner. Because it's not about the not cooking on Sabbath. It's about him being the Lord of the day and allowing to give to you what you need and being open and available to do that. Now, I'm not saying you have to do the cooking thing. It's just an example. That if your rule was, I don't cook on Sabbath, and you made your dinner the night before like you're supposed to, and then you get the Sabbath and you're not supposed to cook, and then you find out that your neighbor, something happened and there's a situation, then you're going to have a dilemma. You're going to be forced with breaking your Sabbath in your eyes or helping your neighbor out because it's your rule. But Sabbath isn't about the list. It's not about the rules. It's about doing what God calls us to do. And so maybe his rule for you is that you cook your meals on Saturday, so on Sunday, you cook for someone else. Maybe once, maybe every week, I don't know. But you understand the difference? So hey, make up lots of rules. I encourage you to do so, but make them on Saturday or Friday or Thursday even. Just keep working them back in the week, which is what we've started doing. Because now on Friday night, we sit down and talk about what we have to do Saturday, so we make sure that we do it. So we don't get to the end of the day Saturday and say, oh, we forgot to do this thing. So we've started preparing for Sabbath on Friday night now. And maybe eventually we'll take it a step further and we'll talk about it on Thursday. Friday we'll get what we need for Saturday from the store. Saturday. But you understand where I'm going with this. Because then you get to Sunday and you don't need the rules. You don't have to figure out, well, should I do this or should I not do it? Because your day is so open that you're able to just receive the Sabbath that God has, that you're ahead, that you're rested, that you're not rushing. Rules don't create our Sabbaths, they protect them. Just like our rules protect our kids, our possessions, change your oil every 3,000 miles, kind of stuff. See, this changed my perspective on this. Because we have this understanding of we've got to have some rules here, because otherwise we know that it's not going to happen. But I don't want to be in a legalistic religion where I just do things because God tells me to do them, and it's just this list of things that I do week in and week out. Do you realize that if you try to create Sabbath with rules, it will not be a day of rest, it will be a day of burden. But if you allow yourself to use rules to protect your Sabbath, your rule day, your day of preparation is a day of joy. Now, if I have a Sabbath, I say, I can't do this today, it's a miserable day. But if I have, like I did yesterday, these are the things that I have to get done today, I am filled with joy because I know that the rules that I am following are enabling me to receive the gift of Sabbath that God has for me on the following day. And that your day of preparation can be just as joyful as your Sabbath. That your day of preparation is just as holy. You are communing just as much with God, who worked for 6 days before he rested for one. That rest is just as much of the character of God as work is. And so what you end up having is a weekend, or wherever it falls in your week, a set of days where both days you are receiving the character of God, where you are prioritizing, where you are working, where you are being efficient, and then you are resting. And in the entirety of that process, you are understanding the nature and the character of God. Both end up being a gift, both end up being full of joy, and none of them are a burden. I invite you to allow that change in perspective to change your life this week. I invite you to go home. If you are not going to have an open Sabbath today, go home and sit down as a family and say, all right, what are the things that are on our list? What are the things that we have to do? And we're putting them on the calendar for next Saturday. Sit down next week on Saturday as a family and say, what do we have to get done today? What needs to be done tomorrow? What do we need to do to set our stuff out for Monday morning so we're ready for school and work? What are the things that are going to come up, and what things can we take? Can we put a dinner in the crock pot? Can we do a little bit of extra on this thing? What can we do to make our Sabbath a little bit easier? Hey, let's go buy some paper plates. And we never use paper plates, but let's not do dishes. What does that look like? Take ownership of your lives, take ownership of your families, and say, what do we need to do to give God the space to bring Sabbath into our lives? Let's pray. Jesus, we thank you for your example of balance and of rest. And God, I thank you for always knowing what we need, always knowing where we need to go and what we need to do. As we go from this place, I pray that we be open to what you would do in us, that God, that we are just able to let you structure our lives in a healthy way, that we are not always behind, but we are just in rhythm and in step with you. Because, Lord, we realize that when we allow you to give us Sabbath, we are so refreshed and so ready for the week. We are so prepared that God, we are not caught off guard. And the more time we spend allowing you to work your rhythm in our lives, the easier it gets. The more caught up we are, the more ahead we are, the less we're frantic, the less we're worried. And God, I pray that you bring that change in all of us. Let us not live in a poverty of time where we're always crunched and we're always behind, but we are just full of abundance. So we say, I've got a whole day of this week with nothing to do because the God of power and the God of authority and the God of wisdom has enabled me to live my life in a way where I have space. And God, some of us may never live in a place where we have financial breathing room, where we've just got more than enough money to go around, that we've got extra laying around. But God, we can have abundance in our time because you have commanded us to do it from the beginning of time. There is no exception. There is no person who is too busy to have a Sabbath, that we can have wealth in our time through the practice of Sabbath. Let us not be afraid of that. Let us not doubt that. And let us seek it as our right as your heirs to have Sabbath once a week. We love you, Lord, and we ask these things in your name.